The renewed investigation into a serial killer in central Indiana.
They've been burnt, they've been crushed.
Investigators say they found more remains of a man identified as a victim of suspected serial killer Herb Baumeister.
Herbert Richard Baumeister was born on April 7, 1947 in Indianapolis, Indiana, as the oldest of 4 children to parents Elizabeth and Herbert Baumeister. Initially, Herb had a normal childhood, but as he entered adolescence, he began to change, developing a dark sense of humor and an unusual obsession with urine. Classmates later recalled Herb often expressing curiosity about the taste of urine, and rumors circulated that he had once urinated on his teacher's desk. Another one of his obsessions was dead animals. One day, Herb came across a dead crow in the street. He put it in his book bag and left it on his teacher's desk the next day. The concerned teacher contacted his parents, who arranged for a medical evaluation. It was discovered that Herb had schizophrenia and suffered from multiple personality disorder. Whether he received treatment is unclear, but it seems his parents did not pursue further care. As a result, Herb's classmates began distancing themselves from him, leaving him isolated and spending most of his time at school alone. Although he maintained good grades in high school, he struggled socially. He tried to befriend the football players, but was quickly rejected, ultimately graduating without any friends. Herb attended Indiana University, where he continued to be an outcast and dropped out in his first semester. 2 years later, under pressure from his father, he returned to college. During this time, he met a woman named Juliana Sider. The two began dating after discovering they had a lot in common and shared a mutual dream of starting their own business. In 1971, Herb and Juliana were married, but shortly after he was committed to a mental institution for a few months. Upon his release, his father secured him a job as a copy boy at the Indianapolis Star, a local newspaper. Despite his efforts to fit in, Herb struggled to make friends and eventually quit. He then found employment at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, where his erratic behavior continued. One year, he sent Christmas cards to his co-workers, featuring a photo of himself and another man dressed in drag, which fueled rumors that Herb was gay. Despite his strained relationship with colleagues, he excelled at his job and was promoted to program director. However, within a year of his promotion, he was fired after sending a letter to Indiana Governor Robert D. Orr that had been urinated on. After being fired, Herb and Juliana started a family, having 3 children over the course of 6 years. While Juliana worked, Herb became a stay-at-home dad as he struggled to find employment. With plenty of free time, he began frequenting gay bars under different aliases and developed a drinking habit. It is believed that Herb began his crime spree around this time, targeting gay men. He would strangle them to death and then dispose of their bodies near Interstate 70. His first known victim was 15-year-old Michael Sean Petrie, who often lingered outside gay bars, engaging in inappropriate activities to make a living. Over the next few years, he claimed 10 more victims ranging in age from 14 to 32. In September 1985, he was charged in a hit-and-run incident while driving drunk. 6 months later, he was arrested for stealing a car, but managed to beat both charges. Herb eventually found a job at a thrift store and saw the potential in owning one himself. Over the next 3 years, he focused on learning the business and then quit his job to pursue his own venture. Borrowing $4,000 from his mother, he opened a thrift store called Save-A-Lot. A percentage of the profits went to the Children's Bureau of Indianapolis, and business quickly took off. Within a year, they made enough profit to open a second store, and after a few years, the Baumeisters became wealthy. In 1988, the family moved to their dream home, an 18-acre horse ranch called Fox Hollow Farms, just outside Indianapolis. Despite their wealth, stress soon followed. Herb began treating his wife differently, often yelling at her for no apparent reason. She gradually distanced herself from the business, but the arguments continued. Herb also stopped maintaining the house, which became increasingly dirty. Oddly, he kept the pool house clean, decorating it with mannequins arranged as if they were attending a party. Over the next several years, Herb and Juliana separated on and off. To escape the turmoil, Juliana and the children would often stay with Herb's mother-in-law, while Herb remained at Fox Hollow Farms to continue running the business. During this period, he shifted his pattern of disposing of bodies, no longer leaving them near the interstate, but instead luring victims to his house where he would kill them and bury them in the woods surrounding the 18-acre property. Herb continued his killing spree, claiming 9 more victims until his 13-year-old son made a disturbing discovery while playing in the woods. He found a human skull. The boy brought it to Juliana, who then confronted Herb. Herb explained that the skull had belonged to his father, an anesthesiologist, who had used it for medical research. He claimed to have found it in the garage and decided to bury it. She believed him. While this was happening, the second store began to fail, and Herb started drinking more during the day. As bills piled up, Herb's wife noticed that her husband was acting stranger with each passing day. While the Baumeisters were trying to fix their family and financial problems, there was an ongoing investigation. Virgil Vandegrift, a highly respected retired sheriff, decided to open a private investigation firm specializing in missing persons cases. In 1994, he was contacted by 2 mothers who reported that their sons were last seen heading to a gay bar. Virgil began posting missing persons posters at gay bars around Indianapolis. Shortly after, he received a call from a publisher of a gay magazine who informed him about the Interstate 70 murders. Convinced that a serial killer was on the loose, Virgil contacted the police, but missing gay men were considered a low priority. Weeks later, Virgil was contacted by a friend of one of the missing men who used the alias Tony. Tony recounted being at a bar when he noticed a man who seemed overly interested in the missing poster of his friend, Roger Goodlett. Tony introduced himself, and the man gave his name as Brian Smart. As they continued to talk, Brian invited Tony to his house. Tony agreed, and they drove to a farm. Tony's description of the property matched Fox Hollow Farm perfectly. Once at the house, they walked to the pool house and sat down. Brian offered Tony a drink, but he declined. At some point, Brian mentioned that he received pleasure from choking people and being choked. He then asked Tony to choke him with a hose while he touched himself. After switching roles, Brian began choking Tony and refused to let go of his neck. Fearing for his life, Tony pretended to pass out. When Tony opened his eyes, Brian seemed startled and quickly drove him back, and they agreed to meet next week. To learn more about Brian, Virgil arranged for Tony and Brian to be followed during their second meeting, but Brian never showed up. Virgil then contacted Mary Wilson, a detective specializing in missing persons cases whom he respected. Mary drove Tony around different neighborhoods, hoping he would recognize the house, but they came up empty-handed. A year later, fate intervened when Tony coincidentally ran into Brian at a bar. This time, Tony was able to get Brian's license plate number and gave it to Mary. Upon further investigation, she discovered that the license plate was registered to Herbert Baumeister. Mary confronted Herb at the store, informing him that he was a suspect in an ongoing investigation and requested permission for investigators to search his home. Herb declined and insisted that any further conversations go through his lawyer. Next, Mary approached Juliana, hoping to persuade her to consent to a search. Although initially shocked by the information, Juliana also declined. Undeterred, Mary requested a search warrant from Hamilton County officials, but her request was rejected due to insufficient evidence. Over the next 6 months, Herb seemed to experience an emotional breakdown. By June, Juliana reached her breaking point when the Children's Bureau terminated its contract with their Save-A-Lot stores, pushing her toward bankruptcy. The haunting image of the skeleton her son had discovered 2 years earlier lingered in her mind ever since her conversation with Mary. Juliana decided to file for divorce and inform Mary about the skull. She also agreed to allow detectives to search their property. While Herb and their son were visiting his mother at Lake Wawasee, Juliana picked up the phone and called her lawyer. On June 24, 1996, Mary and 3 officers from Hamilton County walked onto the grassy area next to the patio. As they examined the ground, they discovered that the small rocks and pebbles where Herb's children had played were actually bone fragments. Forensic analysis confirmed they were human remains. The following day, police and firefighters began excavation efforts, uncovering bones scattered across the area, even onto neighboring properties. Initial searches found 5,500 bone fragments and teeth, with estimates suggesting the remains belonged to 11 men, though only 4 victims were identified. Roger Goodlett, 34. Stephen Hale, 26. Richard Hamilton, 20. And Manuel Resendez, 31. Juliana's panic intensified as she worried for the safety of her son, who was with Herb. Authorities shared her concern. With Herbert and Juliana in the early stages of divorce, it was decided that before news of the discoveries broke, Herbert would be served with custody papers demanding the return of the son to Juliana. When Baumeister was presented with the papers, he handed him over without incident, dismissing it as a routine legal maneuver. After the news of the bones' discovery was made public, Herb disappeared without a trace. A month later, on July 3, 1996, his body was found in his car at Pinery Park, Ontario, Canada, with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He left a note attributing his death to his failing marriage and business struggles. Juliana later provided evidence that Herb had traveled along Interstate 70 during the period of the murders, which helped the police connect the dots in the case. Over the years, bone fragments have continued to surface around Fox Hollow Farm. To date, more than 10,000 fragments have been uncovered. The most recent discovery occurred on May 21, 2024, when the remains of Jeffrey Jones, who went missing in 1993, were identified. Fox Hollow Farm was purchased by Rob Graves and his wife in the early 2000s as a way to escape city life. Although they were aware of the murders that had taken place on the property, they felt they could live with the knowledge that a serial killer once lived there and buried bones on the grounds. While residing in the home, the Graves family reported numerous instances of paranormal activity, such as the vacuum being mysteriously unplugged, sightings of a ghost in a red shirt, scratching at doors, strange nightmares, and wood chips flying across the room following loud banging on the door. To this day, the Graves family continues to live on the property and believe that the ghost of Herb Baumeister is behind these unsettling occurrences. The house was later featured on the sci-fi show Paranormal Witness in 2014.